everyone, welcome back from Christmas break. Thinking back to last term, or not last term, 2020, in the last part of this unit, we've already talked about factored form, and we've already talked about standard form as well. And so we've talked about how to graph those two ways. Today we're going to be talking about graphing in vertex form, which, surprise, surprise, has to do with the vertex. So this is a really nice form because it really tells us a lot about the shape of the graph. So here in this Desmos thing here, I've made where I can play around with the A, H, and K values. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the H. So notice what happens to the graph when I'm changing that H value. It just seems to move left and right. And so when I click on the parabola, notice that the vertex says 3.7. Or if I moved it back to negative 4.1, now the vertex says negative 4.1. K kind of does the same thing, but for the Y values. And so that's why it's called vertex form, is the H and the K really tell us about the location of the vertex. If I change A, that actually makes it stretch or not, or like be compressed. And we're going to talk about the name of that, but so A just kind of changes the direction. So remember, if A is positive, it's up. If it's negative, it's down. So here we've got our form. So A is something we call the stretch factor. Because it's how much we're going to stretch the parabola. H is actually the X value for the vertex. So make sure you're writing this down so that you don't forget it. So that's the H value for the vertex, and be really careful. We're going to talk about that for what the negatives mean. And then K is just the Y value of the vertex. So HK will tell us the location of the vertex, and A will tell us like how much to stretch it. Okay, so I'm gonna move my face back. It's a lot of moving my face. So the vertex, so let's say the vertex is negative 2, 1, and the A value is 2. So I would just write my function in vertex form. So it would be 2 for A times X minus negative 2, because the H is equal to negative 2. So that's squared plus 1. And so really when you simplify this though, because you're subtracting a negative, it's going to actually turn into a positive 2. So your final written form would be 2 times x plus 2 squared plus 1. And so just be really careful about that, and about how that negative is going to be the opposite. So if we were given that to start with, we would know that negative 2, 1 is actually the center. So H is going to be the opposite of what you see. So be really careful with that, and pause the video to make sure you understand that. So H is the opposite of what the vertex is going to be. Okay, so let's go ahead and do an example here. So I'm going to do part of it correctly, and then I'm going to do part of it incorrectly. So, and just know that when I was making the video, I was using my calculator in between all of this, and so it takes a while between some of the written stuff. Okay, so f of x equals negative 1/2 times x minus 3 squared plus 2. So let's say you're given that on the test and you're supposed to graph it. Then we know that the vertex is positive 3, 2, because H is the opposite. Or not H is the opposite, but the vertex X value will be the opposite of kind of what you see. So I'm going to go ahead and plot that at 3, 2. And then we know that because it's a negative 1/2, it's actually going to be flipped upside down. So just be careful. And that's going to come into play later when I'm making the chart. I'm going to move my face back. All right, so we know we already found the vertex. We don't have to worry about that. But we should come up with a couple of more points. So I'm going to go ahead and do 2, 1, and 0 because of the symmetry. And then because I know those 3 points, I can just reflect it over and do the other 3 points. So I'm just going to plug into my calculator. So in between these, so I'm going to just go ahead and do those points. And sorry if there's a jump in the video. I ended up having to like edit it together or something. Okay, so here's our chart. If we plug it in, we get 2 is 1.5. If we plug in 1, we get 0, and 0 is going to be negative 2.5. So I'm going to go ahead and just graph those. So that's 2, 1.5, 1, 0, and then negative 2.5. Cool, and then because of the axis of symmetry, we can just go ahead and just reflect those same points, that same distance away on the other side, which really helps to complete the parabola. So now we just connect the dots. Awesome. and it's not very pretty, but it works. So before I move on, just go ahead and pause the video and make sure you know where each of those parts came from. And if you don't understand, write down the questions so that you know to ask me when you come in for in-person class, or email me. All right, so let's go through the steps of how to graph in vertex form. So first, we're just going to identify A, H, and K. Just remember that H is kind of like the opposite, and I say opposite in like quotation marks, just because it's not really the opposite, but that's one way you might remember it, is that if it says -2, that means that the vertex is at 2 instead. So then we're going to just plot the vertex using H and K, and then we'll just sketch the axis of symmetry going through that vertex, because remember the axis of symmetry and the vertex are always coinciding. We sketch that, and then we're going to plot a couple more points. And for these, you can just use like symmetry. Like in the other example, I only did a couple of points. I did like 3 or something, and then you're just able to reflect that over the axis of symmetry. So use symmetry, be smart about it, use points that are closer to the vertex, because that's really where that difference is going to be, and after that it just goes like and then after you plot those points, you just draw the parabola, connect the dots. Connecting the dots is pretty fun. I think it's pretty cathartic. So make sure you know all these steps. It should be in your packet, but if it's not, just go ahead and write them down. And remember, the vertex is at HK, and the axis of symmetry is x equals h. And so I really like vertex form. I think it's great because it really explains stuff, but let me know if you have any questions.